that in fact is quite unusual for the University of Cape Town. I think it's unusual for many universities to appoint an outsider as Vice-Chancellor. To the best of my knowledge, I'm probably the first outsider as Vice-Chancellor for at least the previous 6 or 7 Vice-Chancellors. So they had always been people who knew the institution and often had been staff members of the institution and knew the institution well. I came in not having ever studied here and not having been a staff member. And I think the first thing I knew I had to do was to sort of do nothing but listen for a year, to get around the institution, to meet as many people as possible, to visit every department, to understand what people thought was working and what wasn't working, and quite slowly to build a vision and to test it with people in the university. I did already have an idea, and that was those were ideas that I'd presented in my interviews and in my presentations before being appointed, and that had generated excitement. So I knew there was already some buy-in and some interest. But in a university, the nature of leadership is, I think, very different from, say, a corporation or a structure where, as a CEO, you can give direction and steer it strongly in that direction. The nature of a university is, firstly, very collegial. So no one accepts really the authority of anyone else, of a dean or of a deputy vice-chancellor or a vice-chancellor. And secondly, the value of academic freedom is very deeply entrenched in the sense that, one understanding of the concept of academic freedom is that an academic should be free to teach who they want to teach, what they want to teach them, how they want to teach them, and to do whatever research they think is of interest to them. So the idea that you would come in and have a vision or a strategic plan from the top, and you would say, this is how we want to change our admissions policies. In other words, you want to tamper with who they're allowed to teach. Or this is how we want to influence the curriculum, what they teach, or how you teach. Or even that, for example, we think the university should focus its research on certain strategic areas. Many academics will turn around and say, that's not academic freedom. I'm here to research what I find interesting, not to be told what would be important to research. So you can't really lead in this strongly from the top or from the front. You have to inspire people with ideas and with a vision. You have to get them to buy into that and get a critical mass to buy in so that eventually it becomes the major way of doing something at the university, and it gets a critical consensus or sufficient consensus to move forward. And that inevitably takes quite a lot longer than it might take in a different environment. One has to be patient, I think, to get there. So in my first year, I was mainly listening, and we took nearly 18 months to commit to a strategic plan, which had 6 main strategic goals and was part of a new vision statement for the university. And although it's frustrating that it takes that long, I think that's necessary in a university environment. So that vision was built around the question, why would leading scientists, leading academics, and top students want to come to UCT when they've got options all over the world? We weren't really seeing ourselves anymore as competing only in a local market. As I said, in that sense, we felt that we could carry on doing what we were doing, and we would be successful in the local market. But we weren't yet a serious global player. So to become a global player, what does that mean? How do we become a destination of choice for a postdoc from Germany who could go to Imperial College or Columbia University or to University of Cape Town? It wasn't going to be through what we could pay them. Our salaries are going to be, in all likelihood, lower than in most developed country universities. It wasn't, in most cases, going to be because we had fantastic labs, better than anywhere else in the world, or better equipment than anywhere else, or even that we had a sufficient critical mass of peers and academics, because it was in each area we're going to be relatively small compared to a leading global university. We identified the need for some sort of niche area and some sort of comparative advantage, and we thought that was our location in the continent. And fortuitously, around 2008 to 2010, the continent of Africa was sort of coming into its own in a way that hadn't been obvious before. So 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. There's a huge interest in trade, a new interest in foreign investment. There's a kind of scramble for Africa between countries and corporations of the world because China is very interested and everyone else is then frightened by that. So there's an interest in understanding the continent and doing business with the continent. And we felt that we could capitalize on that as well. And our goal, therefore, was to have expertise more expertise perhaps than anyone else or than other universities about Africa, or about it won't be about everything, but about critical areas about the continent. So just to pick some examples, climate change is a global concern. You can't think about climate change if you don't know about climate change on the continent of Africa and the oceans around Africa. And it turns out that there weren't any models really of that climate change. So we at UCT aspire to build those models and to know more about climate change as it affects the continent than anyone else at a university in Africa or elsewhere. And if we can get to that point, that will make us a desirable and critical partner to universities around the world and scientists around the world thinking about climate change. The same argument can extend to infectious diseases, to the development of medicines, to post-conflict constitutional democracy. We have a particular knowledge about that. There are a lot of countries across the continent which are shifting from dictatorships to democratic multi-party systems. They're writing constitutions, they're thinking about truth and reconciliation processes. We have a lot of expertise around that, and we can share it, and we can become the go-to place for people around the world who want to understand that in the continent. Our business school has chosen to develop its niche area as emerging markets, and particularly emerging markets in Africa, so that all of this interest in the continent could help us develop the business school, but also the business school would position itself as a destination of choice for people wanting to invest in the continent. So in each area, engineering, mineral resource extraction, legislation around regional economic trade. In the humanities, of course, we've long had certain areas where we have some advantages: anthropology, paleoanthropology, history, comparative African literature, politics and international relations. All of those have local specialisms, and if we could develop that, then that could position us as a global player. And we captured all of that idea in the idea of an Afropolitan university. The Afro obviously being a reference to the focus on the continent, and politan signifying that it was not a retrospective look, a sort of naive subsidy economy, safari economy view of the continent, but rather a cosmopolitan and a metropolitan view of the continent, a continent which is developing fast and is involved with the future. And it's also cosmopolitan in the sense that within the university, we would have strong representation from the continent, the rest of Africa, and from the rest of the world, and that they would be meeting in our classrooms. And indeed, 20% of our students are from outside South Africa, and about 25% of our staff are from outside South Africa, and a good share of them are from other countries in Africa. So that's also part of the Afropolitan vision. And I think that vision has caught on now, 4 years later. It is a driving factor, and it is helping position the university slightly differently from how it was positioned, and in a way that is seen as a partner for other universities across the world.